My name is Tony Shawcross. I'm the Executive Director of the Open Media Foundation. Thank you for joining us. We're one of your hosts today. You're going to hear from a couple of our other hosts, and I'd like to invite the panelists to come and take a seat. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. William, would you start by talking to everybody, telling them a little bit about PEN America?
Of course.
Thank you. Welcome to Representation in Colorado Journalism.
Hello, Denver. Hello. Hello, Denver. What's good? My name is William Johnson, and I am the Program Director for PEN Across America. Now, PEN Across America is a project of PEN America, which is a larger organization that's dedicated to cultivating literary engagement and advocating and protecting free expression. And that includes doing work like this panel today. One way that we do this work is actually through our membership. We are a membership organization, and our members are vital in supporting the work that we do. If you're interested in becoming a member of PEN, see me after the event. I can give you more information. I have cards over there with some more information about joining PEN's work and kind of contributing and supporting us. So just let me know if you have any questions. But I want to thank you all for coming out, and I'm looking forward to this dynamic conversation.
Thank you. And we're so grateful for PEN's partnership. They've been partners of ours for almost a decade now. We've done several events with them, both here and at their space in New York City. And they're just a huge partner and a huge supporter of what we are all doing here in media and journalism, but also so much more in the literary world and free speech world. So please check them out. They're an awesome partner to have. And thank you guys for supporting this conversation in Denver. Another one of our partners and hosts just walked in. Amanda, would you come and tell people about this beautiful building that you're welcoming everyone into and just this space that we're in? This is Amanda Mountain from Rocky Mountain PBS.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, everybody. Hey, how's it going? I'm so happy to see you. Welcome to the Buell Public Media Center. We just opened, I guess, about a little over a year ago, and the building was really designed as a place for collaboration. And so we intended, in co-designing the space with our partners, for this to be a real community center, for people to be able to see what happens inside, to participate, and ultimately for more co-ownership, particularly of public media. And so we're happy that you're here. We're happy that our partners are here. And Rocky Mountain Public Media, I know Tony wanted us to share a little bit about our organization. We are really invested in the conversation and grateful for so many of you who are leading the way and who have been having this conversation for a really long time. I will just say that we've all seen the headlines time and time again of media organizations who are causing damage first within their walls and then externally within the community. And it's harming the public trust. It's making it difficult to expand and diversify audiences. And ultimately, it's breaking the business model. But far too often, we're kind of talking around the fringes of the conversation, really talking about the digital revolution or the advertising industry or the hedge fund ownership. And yes, all of those are real threats to the business, but it really does start within, and this conversation starts within. And so there's so much abundant research in the corporate world about the linkage between healthy organizational cultures and those organizations that are able to best serve communities and ultimately be profitable. And that is really what we are eager to be a part of within our industry, is first starting within. How are we doing as an organization? Are we damaging our staff? Are we damaging people of color who are working to change the industry from within? And then what are we doing to change that? Because if we don't start within, we're not going to be able to expand the public trust, let alone maintain it. And we just see evidence of that happening every day in the headlines. So thank you for leading the way in the conversation, and thanks for including us.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. And please do check out the space. There's maybe a dozen of us partners here on the third floor. The first floor is also just beautiful, so we encourage you guys to check out the space while you're here. I'm going to hand things over to our panel moderator, Tina Griego, and I will take a seat.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me? I'm the panel moderator and occasional interjector. I want to thank you all for being here. Before we start, I want to jump off something Amanda said and frame this conversation a little bit. this is not a new conversation. This is a decades-old problem. And I want to just acknowledge that people are tired of having this conversation. They're tired, and particularly people of color, tired of talking when there is little or no action that comes as a result of all of this talking, right? Where there are pledges that go unfulfilled, where we see the kind of pats on the back with a one step forward and silence with a two steps back. And so I think that we need to acknowledge that. I also want to say, though, that things are different right now. You know, the difference with 2021 is 2020. And 2020, with the racial uprisings, the reckoning, which swept through newsrooms as well, with the pandemic and its disproportionate impact on communities of color, with the economic upheaval that tore through those same communities and others, we are presented now with an opportunity. And I will also say that in Colorado, this kind of spirit of collaboration is flowing through the land. And some of that is embodied by CoLab, by CMP, by OMF. And that too, that spirit presents us with an opportunity. It presents us with an opportunity to work together on solutions that benefit the whole, that benefit newsrooms around the state, so that we have a chance now to talk about systemic solutions within our industry and not just incremental ones. And so the context, this new context, it demands we bring our best to this moment. It demands that we confront this moment and ask ourselves, what are we going to do? What are we going to do so 5 years from now we are not having this same conversation? So I thank you all for being here, for the work that all of you are doing. I thank you for being present. I'm really grateful to the panelists because each in their own way is helping to move this conversation forward. And I will say that in the case of Lori Lizarraga, she's blowing the doors open, right? So Candy Sedevaca will be joining us. She's running a little bit late. Dr. Ryan Ross, who was also among the guests, unfortunately, he had a last-minute conflict with an event at the governor's office, and he needed to be there. But if you know Dr. Ryan Ross, you know that he did not leave me without a challenge for you. And really what he wants people to be thinking about is the integrity of the process, the integrity of the work ahead. What will it take for sustainable change, so change that will survive the kind of constant churn that happens in newsrooms, so that will survive that kind of often tenuous link that one reporter in a newsroom might have with a community, and then that one reporter is gone, and then we're at ground zero. So he wants us to think about the integrity of the process. And the other thing he said is that when we are talking about our workplaces, here's Candy. When we're talking about our workplaces, he wants it to be seen as part of the work of those. Please, Candy. Oh, I'm sorry, you were taking off your coat. How do we help journalists of color be more authentically themselves, come into themselves? And so that's a question that actually we will be discussing tonight. So welcome again to everyone. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're having this talk. And I'm hopeful for action that follows this talk. So I want to start, actually, not in order, but I'm going to start, well, I will start in order. Why not? Councilwoman Candy Sedevaca. I've known Candy for many years. I'm trying to think. I met Candy through her work at Project Voice, really uplifting young people. Fantastic work. Candy is a very outspoken proponent of challenging ourselves to really think about what we mean when we talk about representation in newsrooms. And so I'm grateful that you're here. We now have Shirkya Wedgworth. I just had the honor and pleasure of meeting her within the last few weeks. She is new to CPR. She is CPR's managing editor of accountability and outreach, and so she's actually doing the work. She's in the newsroom. She's figuring out where the chinks are, what needs to be changed, how to do so. And so she'll be talking a lot about that tonight. We have Lori Lizarraga. And so Lori wrote the piece in Westward 6 months ago. I'm not kidding when I say it really kind of blew the lid off of things, right? She really raised high and prominently issues around workplace culture, issues around what it means to be part of a team, what it means to be supported, what it means to be able to bring all of your identity into your work, and raise that not just for Channel 9 to go through some process of internal reckoning, but for all outlets across the state, because this is not an issue unique to Channel 9. And so very grateful for Lori being here. She came in from Texas. So, and then you've met Tony. Tony Shawcross is the executive director of Open Media Foundation, and Open Media Foundation has been working for years to democratize the public square. I mean, they are all about access for all people, and for a long time, at all times. And so, grateful to Tony for his work. All right, before I begin, I need a drink of water. All righty. So you can see over there the title of this panel, Keeping It Local, right? Representation in Colorado journalism. All right. So I'm going to actually start very basic, and I want to start with Lori. I want to ask, when you think about representation, what it means to you, and what I'm really interested in is, has how you think about representation changed over the last 6 months in the time since you published the Westward piece?
A lot has changed in the last 6 months. Yeah, of course. I think that the idea of representation is in an evolution in and of itself. I think we're demanding more from that word. I think we deserve more when we are walking into spaces and thinking about representation. Tina and I spoke about this on the phone, but part of it is because we expect more, we are not being satisfied anymore with just the most basic thing of being like, well, I got the job, so I'm going to put my head down and I made it here, and that's enough, right? And as long as I'm in the room, I am near-ish to where things happen. I'm not contributing. I'm not a decision maker. There is no one in the decision-making positions that look like me, but I'm like near it. Being near to the action isn't enough, and certainly it's not going to be influential enough to have us just in proximity of decisions that are being made. We have to be decision makers. We have to be allowed to keep our jobs long enough to get to places where we can then be promoted. And so, yeah, the idea of representation for me has changed even from when I was hired at 9 and I was in my second week at the job. Because what I realized was, just to have me being hired, I thought that meant that you were hiring the things about me that I brought to the table that were dynamic and were from my community and were from my background and were from my lived experiences. And I learned very quickly that it was more that you wanted the value of my look more than you wanted the value of the journalism that I brought into the room. And I learned that very fast, that we are having a problem with understanding representation and saying representation. It's very easy to talk about being diverse. It's a whole other thing to be diverse. And it isn't enough, I think, and I think we are all coming to a place where we understand that more and more, how to articulate that it isn't enough just to be in the room anymore. It never has been, but we know better. And now that we know better, we're moving toward demanding more and expecting more and believing that it's not just because we are owed it, but that you really need it. You are going to be better for it. And we're going to bring a lot to the table if you'll let us. And that's not just going to be good for me. You're not doing me any favors. I deserve to be here. And I'm going to bring a perspective to this newsroom and to your coverage that you desperately need. If we're talking about profitability, you need to reach my community. I can help you do that. And it's more demanding, but also realizing our worth in that. And I think that's what representation for me is sort of evolving into, is that, it's not enough just to have us in the room. You have to empower your voices from diverse communities. Tina and I talked about this. We talk a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion. That's a thing that's happening across lots of different industries right now. But it isn't enough just to have colorful workspaces. You would call this room diverse. But if I wasn't the one talking and we were talking about something different, then we would just be a room full of people. It's not enough just to have a colorful room. If the voices aren't empowered, then it doesn't progress make. Is that the...
Yes. I love the way that you put that. It's like it's not enough. DEI is not enough. So DEE, which is a kind of weird, but diversity, equity, and empowerment. That's the kind of nuance that's come into your understanding of representation. Councilwoman Sedebaka, I see you nodding when we're talking about representation, and I actually would like, and any of the others too, how you're thinking about representation changes, what it means for you.
I think Lori was on point with really getting at this idea of us sophisticating our understanding of what diversity means. We have been people who have been starved of power and access and superficial representation for so long that previous generations were satisfied with tokenism or superficial representation. Just counting ahead, having a black face or a brown face was enough. And to their credit, we get it. They had to knock that door down for us to even be in the room, let alone for us to lead the conversation or drive the conversation or really be decision makers. And so I feel like we are, as we grow, as we understand what the power structure is designed to do and how sophisticated the power structure itself is, we can recognize that it is such a well-oiled machine that it doesn't even need white people at the helm to perpetuate white supremacy. It doesn't need men at the helm to perpetuate patriarchy. We've been conditioned as people to perpetuate it ourselves. And to some degree, you almost have to perpetuate it in order to be the token that they let in the door sometimes. And we often are really blinded by having our own faces plastered all over things, and we think it's enough. We'll have a black mayor, or we'll have a majority Latina council, and we'll think that that's enough, not recognizing that representation, our stories, equity, justice goes so much deeper than just our skin color. It's really about understanding that you don't have to be white to be a white supremacist. You don't have to be, I guess, in a position of power to perpetuate the power structure's dominance and oppression over other people. And so what we're learning now, and I credit Black women, I credit the movement for Black lives, what we're learning is that values have to be, I guess, more evident in the work that we call diversity and equity, or diversity and inclusion. Equity is a word that's just tossed around nowadays, and I had someone throw that word around just the other day instead of the more appropriate word, which is equal, which we've tried to get people away from. And so our generation, I think, is pushing a different conversation, and we're not satisfied with just having our face plastered all over things, and we're not satisfied with people who look like us telling us the same things that a white person who is a white supremacist would tell us. And don't get me wrong, not all white people are white supremacists, but they do benefit from white privilege and white supremacy. But they can also, too, be allies and call that out when they're in spaces with us and make space for us to talk about justice and what real representation is trying to get at, which is dismantling oppressive structures.
This is awesome. Does anyone want to add to that? So we're now at diversity, equality, and empowerment. Conversations shifting. I want to talk a little bit about, and Laura, you've touched on it. I want to talk about the consequences. So, I think in the little blurb with Eventbrite, we talked about maybe having some numbers. What does it look like in our state, right? We don't have any numbers. They do not exist. And so I cannot stand here right now and tell you that we have 50 Black reporters and 50 Latino reporters, or how many LGBTQ reporters we have, Asian. It doesn't exist, right? And so, part of the move forward, and I want to talk about these consequences, is that, this is, we can't have accountability without transparency. Please don't let me forget that when we get to question and answer, I really like Diamond Hardiman to talk about this, because this has been a lot of the root of her work as well, with News Voices Colorado. Consequences. I want to start with you, Councilwoman. You represent Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, Cole.
I'll give you the whole list. Auraria, Central Business District, City Park West, Whittier, Skyland, Clayton, 5 Points. There's 12 of them.
All right, so there are about 1 million stories of the city in there, right? It's a district. If you're not familiar with Denver, it's a district where there are extremes in wealth, in access to schools, homes, you name it. And it's a district that has seen places like 5 Points be gentrified and replaced. And so when we are talking about the consequences of the lack of representation, I want to take it from the abstract to the concrete. What does it look like? What do you hear from your constituents? What have you seen as a result?
As you mentioned, our district is really ground zero for criminalization of poverty, all of the disparities you can imagine. And it was drawn that way on purpose. And so from the district we have drawn, that in itself is a reflection of not having our people at the table, our stories being told, our understanding of our collective power being at the forefront, but also another vivid one. I apologize for my tardiness, but if you've driven through our district, you also recognize the excessive amount of construction that's happening around every corner. The particular construction site I ran into today is one that I run into almost every single day trying to get out of my neighborhood in Swansea, the I-70 expansion. The I-70 expansion is a mega development project that really catalyzed my race for city council because of what I witnessed in how the media was portraying our story and the consequences of that. I had moved away for almost a decade, and I was living in DC and moved back to Denver in 2014. And immediately got involved in the I-70 debate because I was getting the door hangers and notices that these community meetings were happening, and a final decision about what would happen with I-70 was going to be made soon. I decided to show up to those meetings because I was fearful of potentially losing my great-grandma's home to eminent domain. It had been a threat previously, and for this project and for the A-Line project. And so it was something that I wanted to understand. It was something that I knew had been going on for 10 years, over a decade. We were starting and stopping conversations about what we would do with this highway. And so I would show up to these community meetings, which are often an opportunity to check a box for governments at the federal level, the city level, state level. Community engagement requires a certain amount of meetings. And it doesn't necessarily require that the stakeholders are paid attention to, or that the stakeholders are decision makers. And I found that out very quickly. At my first meeting I showed up to, there were probably about 100 people from my community there. And it was a meeting that lasted for hours because they allowed community members to speak up about how they felt about these final proposals and the particular proposal that's being implemented now. Everybody, of those 100 people, I would say 98 of those people testified in opposition to this project, to this specific proposal. And in the news the next day, I saw that they explained that there was over 100 people in attendance, and then they skipped over the entire content of what happened at that meeting and jumped right to what the preferred covered lowered alternative was. That's what they were calling the current proposal at the time. They even named it preferred. Remember, language is important. Like, they named it that so that it would be easy to skip over the content of the meeting, count the community engagement, and jump straight to some ulterior motive or some agenda that did not reflect the stories of the community. What would have been important to cover, and I'm looking at you because you gave me so many opportunities to cover this on your show, and that's why I love public media so much, Denver Open Media specifically. But what they would have captured, if they had captured our stories in that process, were the people in our community who were there when the highway was initially built and who were told when it was built that first time that it would come down in 40 years, that it wasn't going to be permanent. You would have the stories of people who fought it the first time. You would have the stories of people who were involved when it was initially, when I-70 was initially going to be down 6th Avenue. And they talked about how the wealthy interests on 6th Avenue were able to mobilize their resources to fight against it. You would have the stories of the people who suffered cancer and the consequences of digging and building that highway in a Superfund site and never had any legal recourse after being local hires on those projects, because when it's over, there's no real way for people to take action when they've been harmed. And so those are the many specific stories that could have been covered amongst many others that were not covered. And so you get this story in the media of over 100 people in the community, preferred alternative, and then toll lanes that will alleviate traffic. And it's a very simplified version or narrative that may or may not involve truth. Truth doesn't matter in the media anymore, anyway. And you have people who absorb that and digest it as truth and then draw their own conclusions and say, well, it's going to make traffic better in the region. If the cost is a couple people losing their homes, so be it. It's for the greater good.
I do think it matters, too, to say that it's somebody's version of the truth. Mm-hmm. It just depends on who's writing it, who has been plagued with writing that story, among many, many others. The problem with the fact that news is having to churn out so much content. You can't possibly care about every single story. Luckily, if you hire from within your communities and you hire community-oriented journalists, they'll care for you. They'll put so much content out there about your community, you will have too much to fill your airwaves. You don't have to not care. You don't have to give your version of, I don't know, this story is complicated, a lot of people talked and things happened and so here you go. You may just genuinely, it's not so much that it's not true, so much as it's your version of this is what happened, this is a complicated issue. I don't know these people. They're not my community. Bad things happen to people all the time. So let's just write this thing and eventually there's going to be less traffic or something. You know what I mean? I think it can be even less ill-intentioned so much as it's just there is too much. The value of having us in the room is we got a lot of care.
I mean, I would say, I agree, and I would say that the insidious is the much greater challenge than the blatant.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask, I'm hoping I wasn't one of those reporters because I remember that meeting.
But and thank you to Tina as well, because you were coming back to Denver at that time, I think, and it was kind of on the tail end of those decisions that were being made, and we were fortunate enough to be able to lean on a few reporters to get our stories out there. And unfortunately, you know, we have to build our outlets, because often when we get the reporters who are willing to tell our truths, they're smaller media outlets. They have a smaller audience, and we don't necessarily in our communities, you know, understand why it's important to reject the mainstream media and support our smaller media outlets. We don't understand that there is an element of truth and intentionality that comes with a lot of our smaller media outlets, and in order for them to grow and control the narrative or drive the narrative in a different direction, we have to support them. We have to watch them. We have to read them, buy them.
Yes, amen to that. I do want to ask very quickly, and then I want to move to Shirkya, because Shirkya's job is working on solutions. But first, Councilwoman, I'm wondering how you would describe then the impact on community to not see that history, that context, those voices reflected. What is that? This is something of a leading question, but really, what is the impact of that on the relationship with local newsrooms?
We don't trust them. You know, we suffer the consequences of not having our stories told, and we don't trust them to tell them our stories. We're still absorbing their stories about us and subconsciously, like, allowing that to still shape our narrative. But, you know, for people like me, as an elected official now, it's been very difficult to do my job, because, you know, that mistrust from those previous interactions is there. And when I work with reporters now, I'm very well aware of how it goes down, even when they put a reporter in front of me who looks like me. Sometimes they'll use a reporter who looks like me to get in and get a story, and then they don't even let the reporter air or run the story that they want to run. They'll edit it to the degree that it's a soundbite that is damaging to the cause anyway. And so it's difficult for us to not only repair broken relationships, but then it just deepens our inability to get our story out to affect transformational change. We need the people to hear us. We need the people to hear what's going on. In my work specifically, I am trying to communicate with the masses. I represent over 76,000 people just in my district alone. And in order for me to do the will of the people, I need to have an outlet to communicate with the people what is happening, what they need to be engaged on, where we need their real input, especially when I'm like one of the ones who is trying to actually listen and take what they're asking me to do and turn it into change and policy. Okay. And so it disadvantages everybody in the long run, because it prevents our ability to make change.
Thank you. And so I want to move to you, Shirkya, because you started at CPR 6 months ago, which is about a year after CPR was doing its own very public grappling with issues around representation in the newsroom, around we'll call it now diversity, equality, and empowerment. And so I'd like for you to kind of reflect on what you're hearing a little bit, what you found when you started at CPR, and really kind of what went onto your to-do list in terms of making change, helping create change.
Okay, it's funny, I was listening to Candy's story. I pretty much did the same thing. I was away for 13 years in D.C., and I was covering other communities like they were my own. I loved it. It was great. And I got a lot, I learned a lot. I was able to, make, some great stories based on who I was as a person, right? But it's funny because when I was in D.C. as a journalist, I was Shirkya, I could, I was totally sure, I could be me. Then I moved to kind of another niche media where I felt like I had to check Shirkya at the door. What I realized when I came to CPR was that I don't have to check Shirkya at the door. And oftentimes when we're having discussions or having meetings, and I'm saying, I'll give my opinion, like, hey, like it's like you said, it's more than just to be in the room. But, it really depends on which room you're in, right? So I'm like, I've been in the rooms where I'm looking at people, I'm like, that's what y'all think? So, it is, if you're in the right room, and so like CPR is making these intentional efforts to become more aware and be like, okay, we're going to make some conscious efforts here. We're going to do this. And there was nobody better to get me on this position than Shirkya from Eastside Denver, who got all my skills from, Southeast DC, my kids from DC, but my heart is in Denver, So when I cover these communities and when I'm talking to my reporters, I'm talking to my editors, I'm talking to my community, So it's just it's a different feeling, because I've been in newsrooms where you don't, and I keep on hearing Arvada, and it drives me crazy.
Who's saying that?
Like everyone, I'm like, what? So I'm like, okay, there's like these things, but.
Or Swansea.
Yeah, you're like, oh, so there's these things that no one would get because, I have my reporters are from Brooklyn and Albuquerque and they don't have these things. So I feel like I'm not only representing Shirkya, a black journalist, I'm representing Shirkya from Northeast Denver when I'm in that room. And sometimes when I'm at the table, I'm like, okay, this is Shirkya speaking, and this is Eastside Shirkya. Hold on, this is the question that I wanted to ask, like this, right? And then we'll put on Shirkya, the journalist. And I can do that with my reporters and my editors and my team, and I absolutely love it. And it's like, and I make it a way for my editors to do the same thing with me. Like I want my editors to come to me, and if they have questions about, making sure they're including people in their stories, and how do I ask this question? Where should I go? And that's what I'm there for. I'm a resource. I'm a resource to my newsroom, to the community. And I call myself like a bridge, right? But I'm not only the bridge to my community, but I'm also the bridge for my editors, my reporters to upper management. It's almost like I kind of feel like oftentimes we're in the newsroom where everyone's looking like this. Okay, you guys come over here. You guys like this stuff. You're kind of looking down like this, right? But in my role, I'm sitting down. I'm coming down here and I'm grabbing a beer. Like, hey, what's going on? Having a conversation that I could. So all my reporters, not just people of color, could be a bridge to upper management.
You have a kind of mantra or a touchstone that you use when you're talking to them, particularly about covering communities of color, which I really love. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is my thing with trying. It's being accountable. And the way we be accountable is with our tracking system. Our reporters ask every source they have their pronouns, their ethnicity, and we kind of put it, into a system, and we kind of see, we kind of watch what's going on, and then if we see okay, there's just a whole lot of white men we've been interviewing this week, then we can be like, okay, let's huddle, okay. We need to bring this down some, let's make this even out a little bit. It's that simple. It's just like having straight point blank, conversations. That's being accountable. Being present. That's where you build that trust. Go to these events, support your community gatherings, support, these HOA meetings, go be present. I know it's hard right now with, COVID and things like that, but you could be present with an email. Like, hey, Barb from this HOA, what's going on? That's to be present, right? And that's for CPR as a whole. We'd be present as a whole in media in Colorado, right? So it's being present, being accountable, and being intentional. Perfect example, we have a story now, we're working on a point of view story for the train. And they know exactly what they want. We want to get a middle young person who listens to podcasts, who has to ride the train a long way. And let's create a survey. Or you can just go to the train and find somebody with freaking headphones on. Like, come on. And they're like, oh. I'm like, really? So it's just like, that's being intentional. Let's do it on purpose. Go look for the headphones. And you know what? It's okay to go and look for a brown person. It's okay. Just be intentional. So be present, be accountable, and be intentional.
Thank you so much. I really like that. When we're talking about tools for change, Tony, this cues you, because this is some of the work that you have been doing of late to try to establish some baselines, to try to build a foundation for change.
Thank you. And Shirkya, I don't know if you got through all the stuff you guys are doing, because I've just been so impressed with what I've been learning about CPR doing. What? Yeah, it's so much fun. So, I hope you get a chance to talk. You will have a chance to talk a little bit more about that. This might not be totally necessary, but I'm just going to mention to everyone that diversity in the media is 10 to 20% less diverse than just the general U.S. workforce. This is some statistics about radio newsrooms versus newspaper and television. Television, because people see it, is actually a little bit better than radio and newspapers, but still 90% white, 2/3 male in radio and newsrooms, and 77 to 79% white in TV, and still over 50% male. So because of this, we got a grant a few years ago from the Colorado Workforce Development Council. They don't care about the media. They want disadvantaged people to have career opportunities in all industries. And so they've selected a bunch of industries where they're just trying to help diversify the workforce. They had no interest in a dying industry like journalism or media to be part of that, because we're just not creating that many jobs. But they did recognize that the impact of diversity in the workforce in media is huge. It's not just like retail. It's not just like construction. The impact of diversity and opportunity for people in media and journalism is just on a different level than these other industries. So they let us into this program that they are doing called the Next Generation Sector Partnerships, and gave us some funding to help shift opportunities for underrepresented communities in media in Colorado. We also got support from the National Corporation for National and Community Service, or AmeriCorps. So this program is mainly run by AmeriCorps Vistas, one of whom's back there. Nicholas, wave your hand. He's volunteering for a whole year to make this program possible. So I'm going to just talk about a couple of the things that we're doing with that program. One is that we provide a free HR and recruiting service where we help. Most newsrooms and media organizations want a more diverse workforce. They just don't know how to recruit and don't know how to retain once they have a more diverse workforce. They know it's something they should be doing, but they don't invest the resources that are necessary to make that possible. And so we essentially just serve as their HR department with support from these other groups. Yeah. Thank you. Sure. So we post their positions to way more job boards than they would have time to do themselves, over 20 free job boards. We organize all the applicants into spreadsheets. We survey all the applicants, collect demographic information. We evaluate all these job boards and evaluate whether or not the majority of applicants coming from, God, is my internet that bad? I should have preloaded all this stuff. It is. Evaluate whether or not the applicants coming in from each of these different job sites are mostly white, mostly female, mostly male. God, I apologize that none of this stuff is loading. In post, we'll be able to put this in. So there's an example. So Indeed, journalism jobs, Andrew Hudson's. This is male versus female, white versus non-white. So we're evaluating all these different job boards, what kind of diversity is coming from all these different sources, and posting to the job boards that have the most diversity. We survey all of the applicants, help schedule interviews, and we've placed now, I think, about 30 positions. I know there are actually a few people in this room that their positions were hired through our service. CPR, they're doing their hiring through our service. And thank you, I don't need that. And then now we've had over 6,000 applicants apply for jobs through this service. Over 2,000 of them, we have all of that demographic data. So we've also just recently started building, I hope this loads a little faster, started building a freelancer database. So you can find in each community, in each neighborhood, people with different specialties and that represent different diverse backgrounds. So we're still just getting started with this project, but we are building this freelancer database to help newsrooms find the freelancers that they're looking for.
I will say the value of what you're doing is so important because, I mean, for so many reasons, but I mean, especially as we're talking about a time where news organizations and just American workplaces in general are trying to get more woke and trying to truly be more representative. It's nice of you to say that, they don't have enough time to do, but I mean, the problem is that they really haven't been investing in this as an actual issue. To have your one be responsible for the role you hired them for, and then to also be representative of every other black or brown person, and then also fix the culture you have created and make it better for all the other people of color. You are tasking this person who is usually outnumbered by a lot of people to do a lot of roles, too many roles, and that is not usually why you hired them in the first place. So if we're really gonna see change that is cultural, not just hiring your way to a diverse workspace, but hiring yourself into a culturally supportive workspace, then you actually have to invest the resources that it requires to change the culture so that you keep the talent that you hire. And because a lot of us don't want to stay because the cultures don't make any sense for us, and you're asking us to fix all the problems that you created. You really have to invest the resources that it will require to make a change culturally. And that requires really putting money into, okay, if we say we're trying to do DEI, how are we really trying to do that? Not asking your one black person to fix your problems and saying, okay, well, we got somebody working on that, check. It's such a big enough problem that it does need its own stats. It does need its own team. It does need its own time and resources and money and effort and energy. And that is the difference. It isn't just a box that you can check. And DEI makes it sound simple. We diversified. We hired X number of people in this amount of time. Did you keep them? Did they stay? How many in the population that you have? Is it really representative of what your community looks like? And do they feel like they have a seat at the table? Or are they standing by just biding their time because they're replaceable? It's a big enough issue that it deserves resources like this. And I'm so grateful that you're doing what you're doing. I think newsrooms need to take more accountability and responsibility for the amount of work it's going to take to fix what it looks like right now.
One of the things that I would add that I think was really frustrating when we were trying to address the situation that happened at 9 News was the way that newsrooms hire, or their aspirational goals for hiring minorities is based on our proportion of the population. When we do that, on its face, it sounds fair, right? If there's 10% black or brown people in Denver, only 10% of our newsroom has to be black or brown. And like they really stick strictly, or they don't surpass goals if they're not directly connected to our proportionality in the population. I think that is problematic in the sense that it sets us up to still be a minority, even in that newsroom, in that news space. And it perpetuates the, I guess, the isolation, the marginalization of the people within the newsroom, because it replicates what's out in society rather than intentionally saying, well, who cares if there's only 2% black people in the Denver population? Like, that's not what we care about. So it doesn't matter that we go above 2% in our newsroom, because they were really proud that they were mirroring the demographics in the city. But when you do that on a small scale in a newsroom, that's like one black person. That's one brown person.
So this naturally tees up your tracker, but before we do that, I just want to make sure, because we're running up on time, I want to make sure that if there are any questions from anyone in the audience, that you get a chance if you have to leave, and then we can come back to your diversity tracker. So any questions? You have a I'm sorry. You have a go. Diamond, yes. If you all don't know, Diamond Hardiman is the project manager for News Voices. It's a collaboration between CMP and CoLab and Free Press. Diamond works with Free Press, and she is sadly leaving us to work with Free Press in Chicago. But Diamond, this is really a question for you, just because I want you just, if you could reflect on some of what you heard and what you heard. How does that resonate with what you heard coming out of the News Voices conversations? Do we have a microphone?
Yeah, if you're going to answer, come take a mic, please.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so how does it resonate with what we
Yes.
heard? I mean, I think it's a lot of what we heard in the report. Questions about tools that we can use for transparency.
And when you talk about the report, you're talking about the Black Voices working group?
We released a Black Voices report that we did working groups with community organizers, journalists, and a few funders, asking them, how do we engage with like this legacy of harm that we're talking about between newsrooms and specifically Black communities? And what is the future that we want? And so what are the steps to repair in between? And what we're hearing from everyone here is what people are asking for in terms of that report. What does transparency and accountability look like? And what kind of tools can we use to empower people to act on that in their own ways? And really analyzing what harm looks like and being able to sit in it and understand all the different ways that harm occurs. So how does it look internally? What does it mean for journalists that are in newsrooms? But also, what does it mean for communities? And what does it mean for communities' agency? Not just in terms of like, how can they be a part of their own media systems and how can they take and have power to share their own stories and their own information, but how does that impact how they can have agency and power in other spaces as well, like I-70, like getting access to food, like COVID. So it's really what a lot of people are thinking about and talking about, which is exciting to hear because it means that there's a lot of people who are putting their minds to it and putting their heads on it. So yeah.
Thank you, Diamond. It's really, if you haven't had a chance to see it, you can find it on the CoLab website. The work will be carried forward by CoLab's Director of Engagement, Sylvia Solis. And so we're working now on the Latinx report, which will be out in November. And the recommendations are different from each group. It's very interesting. Go ahead.
And for our watchers at home, try and summarize that question.
The question is, why go with the smaller media outlets? What do they do that keep us coming back to them?
And this is someone joining us from 9 News. Thanks for coming.
I would say they engage in the journalism that we're taught about, right? When we learn about journalism, we learn that it is a field of integrity, right? You don't go in as a journalist and try to only capture one side of a story. Your goal as a journalist is to capture all sides of the story, present the information in an unbiased way, disclose biases if you have them, but allow the viewer to, make their decisions in an informed way. I think that what community journalism is doing is just that. They're trying to present all sides of the story and not just a curated narrative that supports or perpetuates the dominant power structure. And I like that because we know that throughout time, mass media has been one of the primary tools of social control and maintaining the current power structure and oppressive systems that exist. We look to the news for our information, our knowledge base, and what we are basically trying to form our own opinions around. And if it's incomplete, you can't possibly form an educated opinion or understanding of anything. And I think that when you look to community organizations, they're giving you the other side of the story. They're giving you the other pieces of information that you couldn't get in a 30-second story. Length of time is really important on nuanced issues. You can't educate the masses in 30 seconds. And I think community journalism tries to give us that opportunity to dive a little bit deeper, to ascertain truth.
More like localized community organizations and smaller outlets, you're also looking at reporters who have been there with a long time, who look a lot like you or are very aware or familiar with or potentially from those same communities that you're talking about. And I think it's the challenge of, in larger, more mass media, larger news organizations, they've subscribed to this idea that like your proximity to the community is bias. And so it makes it easy to say, like, well, no, that's too close to it, isn't it? It's a little emotional. That's a little bit passionate. That's a little bit too on the nose for this community. Like, it's like you're asserting like too much feeling. And so we've been told for a long time, I think, as people of color from these communities, that when we get close to what we're talking about, that when we feel deeply about it, and so we represent the people the way we would want to be represented, that then we've suddenly somehow lost our professionalism or lost the journalistic integrity, except for when white people do it, that's not what you call it. And so I think that it lends to, I think in a larger news organization, when you're keeping that wheel churning, I think it's easy to just say like it's bias and keep it moving, especially when your manager doesn't also look like those communities. I think that's what's so powerful about having managers in positions who are not just managers, but up and down the ladder of executives and leaders who are diverse, because you can help make better decisions at these places that have just subscribed to the way it's been done, not realizing that when you're saying it's biased, what you're actually saying is you're being too much from where you are.
Right. So
to bring yourself.
Okay. Right. Actually, I was Shirkya. I was gonna note that you work for what is probably the largest newsroom in the state now, and so. How would you address Zach's question? How do you build that trust? How do you
keep them coming back? Yeah. So as I'm listening, one of the things also that's going to be a part of my job. Again, I'm in a new role, and I get to make it my own.
Surprisingly, she's in radio, even though she doesn't use that mic, huh?
Oh, I came from print, I'm sorry. So a large part of things I want to do is to partner with smaller community papers and to tap into our resources and they can tell the story better than we can, because it's that local community journalism that we don't have from, again, that way up here looking down type thing. So a part of my role, what I really want to do is partner with smaller community organizations, media outlets, and we can exchange and share stories and share news, even if we can't cover everything, right? But if we partner with these small organizations, we can cover it like it should be covered, right?
You're describing collab.
And not sensationalizing things. Like, mainstream media sensationalizes things in an unnecessary way. And they're always in search of that salacious story or the salacious like piece of a story, rather than just like objective truth. Like, just put the facts out there. That's all we need. Just give us the facts.
Zach, are you taking notes?
He is taking notes. Do we have any more questions? Yes, Diamond.
So I forgot to mention this when I was talking about the report, but the biggest thing about it is like dreaming what's possible and what we can build. So I wanted to ask anyone that wants to take it, like, what is your wildest dream with all the resources, or redistribution of resources? What's your dream for representation in journalism?
I would love, and this is coming from a city council member who was devastated when we disinvested from Denver Open Media, to be frank. My dream is to see the taxpayers' dollars creating that the largest objective news outlet available to the public. And we have the ability to hold that news outlet accountable for transparency in a way that we don't have with private news outlets. We can't make them transparent. We can't make them accountable because they're private entities. They don't have to disclose these things. And so the beauty of public media is that level of accountability that we can demand and actually deliver on, but we have to invest in it to get it if we want that. And so my big dream is that one day we understand the role of media as the fourth branch of government, and we invest in it accordingly.
Wow. Okay. I think my big dream, honestly, is for my daughters to grow up and see people on TV that look like them. I want them to read names that sound like theirs. And I want it to be normal, not to be white. That's what I want. That's my dream.
That's a tough question. That's a good question. I guess my dream for representation changes, all the time based on how I'm seeing our horizons become brighter, and seeing our voices matter in spaces in a new way, and really seeing us as communities of color feel our worth too, more and more. And as that keeps happening, I think the dream is going to change. But my dream would be more for the communities, because I love journalism. The power of storytelling, holding people accountable, shining light in dark places, educating about communities that your viewers might not be familiar with, asking for more, demanding better, and then seeing it come to fruition based on journalism. My dream is that more diverse communities get to see that power, because damn, when it starts working for people, it is so fun to watch how community rises and answers the call, and how when you say jump to organizations that you're calling out on the news or in papers or on the radio, they say, how high? Holding people accountable as watchdogs of the community is so incredible. And the communities who are diverse, communities of color, communities that have been marginalized for so long deserve that power, because there are so many causes and stories and people who deserve that power to be yielded in their favor.
Tony, that's a tough act to follow.
Yeah. My dream for journalism is way more engagement. It's what Sylvia is working on with Co-op. It's what we're working on. Way more powering the edges. like when I watch Channel 9, every once in a while they're doing the kind of stuff Lori was just describing. Sometimes they're also just regurgitating my Twitter feed or my Facebook feed. It's like news for people who don't have Facebook and Twitter. And I would love if that's all they were doing. If all they were doing is the shit that the public can't do, you know? Because there's a lot that just members of the public can't spend the time and money and stuff to do. And there's people in this room that I've seen do stuff that is like what journalism is here for, and is so inspiring. And it's not enough of our time and energy going to the hard-hitting, investigative, holding power to account, and too much of the like just whatever, just like entertainment news or something like that. So my dream would be that we let the public and really empower the public to do the stuff that they want to do anyway, which is what we're working on, and then also make sure the journalists have the resources they need to do the stuff that nobody else can do.
Great.
And I want to give one plug because we're pretty much out of time.
Yeah, we are out of time.
So besides the DEI tracker, I'm not going to talk about that, but we are having a meeting on Friday that anybody watching or anybody that's here that would want to be part of as part of this Next Generation Sector Partnership. One thing we're working on is trying to make sure that when we're doing efforts like this, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not replicating efforts. When there are initiatives and collaboratives, we all kind of know about it. Like I've been so impressed with what CPR is doing, but honestly, CPR sometimes works in a little bit of a vacuum, and it's the same for all of us, you know. It's the same for all these organizations, and we have so much more to offer each other sometimes than we're giving. So we're having a meeting this Friday, Collab, us, Press Association, a few others, where we're trying to talk about all these initiatives around DEI, around inclusion, around inclusiveness, around engagement, and make sure that we're all aware of what all these different working groups are doing. So if anybody else wants to be involved in that meeting this Friday, we do it every quarter as part of the Next Generation Sector Partnership Program with Colorado Workforce Development Council. We'd love for anybody else to be involved in that.
Thank you. So we are at time. I want to thank everyone here. I want to thank the Penn Center. Thank you for all the work that you are doing.
Yes.
And I want to thank Diamond for letting me put her on the spot. And I just, everyone who's here, I really appreciate it. And of course, our panelists. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Tina.
Yes, thank you.
Tina, do you want to taking some of the reins of what Diamond has been working on? Do you want to talk about the future of the Black Voices? Or Sylvia's going to do it?
Taking the reins.
Great.
And I'm her trusty sidekick.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we want to, what Diamond has started with News Voices Colorado, which is really about community-led solutions, and we had those groups were a combination of journalists and community members talking about how do newsrooms better serve community. The idea of power, sharing power. You know, Diamond talked to me a lot about it, and I have to admit it, like, took a while for it to penetrate. Like, what do you mean, power? But it's really about how do newsrooms share power with communities. So that the kind of stuff of life, all of the nuance, all of that context, that history, those voices are elevated. So we that is a big part of the work that we have a big lift with Diamond leaving us, and so we will continue with Latinx Voices, and next year we will do similar conversations with members of Colorado's Asian and Indigenous communities. And we have projects that we're working on together, because I do want to stress, like, much like, you know, people are tired of just write the talk, what I call the empty, pretty words that never lead to anything. We don't want these reports to be static. They are the starting place. And we have a lot of starting places now. This conversation fits into all of the starting places. We're all headed in the same direction, I hope. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, everyone.